everyone. Welcome to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce, and today I have a special guest. I have one of my fans who wanted to come on and talk. He's also a filmmaker as well. I have Everett Dudgeon. Everett, welcome to the Horror Room, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me, Travis. I'm a huge fan of yours, and I have to say, the intro music that you use for the horror realm is so recognizable that when I play it in my apartment, even my girlfriend recognizes it. She's just like Travis Bruce. I'm like, yep, exactly. Did you
Nice,
come up
nice.
with that music?
Actually, I was at first when I first started doing YouTube. I had no music at all, and then some people say, "Well, you need to get some music." So I started looking up royalty-free music,
Mm.
and and I sampled different ones over time, and then I liked that. I found that one. I was like, I fucking love this one, and it just became my little intro song now.
It's a banger for sure.
People love it. So you were once or you are a filmmaker, correct?
Well, I right now I'm a composer for music and television, but I'm definitely trying to be a film director as well. I'm also a writer. I actually am having my first short story published by Arcane Shadow Press next year. It's coming out Monster Bash 2024. So that's the date. It's for the compilation called Ed Wood's Haunted Worlds.
Sweet, sweet, sweet. Definitely let me know. I'll love to check it out, man.
For sure.
Yeah. And I mean, you sent me a nice message a couple weeks ago. You were like, after watching your interviews, it actually motivated me to want to make films.
Yeah. Well, I greatly appreciate that. Honestly, it's been it's been a little bit trying, just because of the type of genre that I want to do and the type of films I want to make. It's not really what the uh, general horror audience wants. So it's been a little bit of a trying task.
So, what are some of the struggles that you've or obstacles you've ran into?
I think really what it comes down to for me is just how what I grew up on. The first film I ever saw was Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. So I was right into all the older black and white monster movies right away. Um, and I just kind of stuck with them. And to the point where probably in public school, high school, I sort of felt pressure to kind of get into more zombie slasher type stuff just because everyone else was into it, and
More,
I got dragged to movies like, you know, Urban Legend and stuff like that. I'm like,
yeah.
oh, I don't want to sit through this, but it is what it is, and but I always kind of went back to those older movies and a lot of the older Hammer movies and Godzilla movies and stuff like that. And the struggle is trying to pitch something like that now. Um, Back in 2010, I got this idea that I really want to make like a 1950s style monster movie. And I got it in my head that I not only want to do a film in that style, I want to make it exactly like how they did it in the 50s. So I wanted to shoot it on film, on sets, using all old technology, old techniques that I learned in film school because I learned how to edit by hand, and I was still using film and everything. And I got the notion that I wanted this 1950s camera. It was a Mitchell BNC, and just by luck, I found this camera collector in North Carolina had one for sale, and I worked 3 jobs to pay it off. I begged my parents. I'm like, "Look, just loan me the money right now. I'll pay it off, like, please." And to their credit, they lent me the money. My dad was so against it. He was like, "I listen, I will go out. I will buy you a red camera right now. I will buy you like whatever you need. Like, please don't get into this." Because he was so worried because especially now people can film on their phones and everything. He's like, "Why are you doing this?" And I was like, I just have this notion that I needed this camera, and I that's what I wanted to do, and I wanted to shoot it on black and white film, so there wasn't really a color version that distributors could turn to. It was like, no, this is what it is. It's black and white, and That was pretty trying, and just that whole camera story in itself didn't come back until about 2017, 2018, where the owner of the camera passed away, and I had such a connection with him because the day after I bought the camera, he actually suffered a stroke, and his son called me and he's like, "Look, I can ship you the camera, not a problem." But I felt such a bond with him because not only was he a camera collector, he was actually one of the cinematographers for one of my favorite grindhouse movies called Dr. Gore, and that was my nickname in high school because I used to draw
Really?
all gory stuff, and
Yeah.
because it's so ironic that he was actually the cinematographer on that, and I actually brought my Something Weird video DVD to his family. They had never seen it. He had all like merchandise and everything like that for the movie, but I brought it to his family. I got to visit him in the hospital, and he knew who I was, and he was just like, "Listen, you can do the movie. You just got to stick your neck out." And seeing that camera collection, it had like the cameras that shot the Abbott Costello films, had the camera that shot James Whale's Frankenstein, had a camera that shot 2001, Planet of the Apes, Hitchcock's VistaVision camera. It was insane. He actually had Chaplin's personal camera as well, Charlie Chaplin's
Yeah.
personal camera, and it was incredible just seeing that. And that I was getting so like wrapped up in it. I was like, okay, like this is gonna be good. And through a bad set of circumstances, because I live in Canada and it was being shipped from North Carolina, and I lost my job halfway through, and I didn't have the money to pay for the customs or the shipping or anything like that, so it sat at the border, and there was no computers used. His family, they lived deep in deep in the woods, deep deep in the south. So they didn't have any computers. So everything was written down, pen and paper, like tracking numbers. And I accidentally lost the tracking number, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the camera. I called the storage facility, and they're like, "It's going to take. If you don't have a tracking number, it's going to take. It's impossible to find it." And I remember seeing a post in 2017 that the camera collector Martin Hill had passed away, and I felt so bad because all these years I could have spent with him and spent talking to him, but I was embarrassed because I know he was going to ask me about the camera, but I was embarrassed, and I just I was like, well, I may as well give it a shot, and I called them and I said, is there any hope at all, like to try and find this camera? And they said it's gone. They said there's no way, and my parents were freaked. My girlfriend was mad. All my friends were like, "You just blew it. Like, why would you like it, after all this time? You dragged your heels on it. You wanted to get this camera and everything." And then in 2017, he passed away. The storage facility was moving actually at the exact same time that I called them that month, and I get a call back and they said, "Everett, it didn't happen to be an old camera, did it?" All those years later. And I was like, "You got to be kidding me." And they said, and I called him, and the camera was literally right next to the guy I spoke with. And he turned after our conversation and he saw the camera box there. And he called me right back. He's like, "It's right here." So
Wow.
so had he not passed away, had I not called at that exact moment, it just the stars aligned, and they actually waived the storage fees. Everything, because it was such like an emotional thing for me. I broke down crying and everything because it was so emotional. And remember my dad calling me, and he's just like, "Well, the Eagles landed and it came in 6 flight cases, like huge cases. Like it's not, I I'm sure most viewers are thinking it's like a little camera. No,
Those
it's a
things.
massive camera. It's like loaded. It's about 300 pounds. Um, and so I got it, and I immediately was like, okay, I gotta like, I'm in it now. I have to make something with it.
Absolutely.
I got to do it. It's the stars aligned. I got to do it. And I it yeah. trying to convince people that to shoot on that thing. Not only is it one of the most expensive formats, I mean, probably 65 millimeter is way more expensive than 35, but it's also a niche thing I want to film. It's not so it's
Yeah.
so trying to explain that to distributors, and not only distributors but producers, actors, especially now, they're like, "What are you talking about?" Like,
You
it
got
so it was difficult. It was really difficult, but a lot of people were like, "Okay, you can do this. You can do this." Like, and I just figured, okay, I gotta get my act together. So I hand painted 3 sheets that I would hand out to distributors and potential producers. So it was like that old style movie poster on the front cover, and then the back cover of the one sheet was kind of a synopsis explaining how the production would go, and then you would use that for producers. I also would do like an animatic. So coming from a visual art background, I storyboarded the entire movie, and I would actually edit the movie beforehand, so that way I could cut down on the film costs, because that way I knew the shooting ratio and like how much film I can use and calculated everything, and I would hand it over to people. And so it was a lot of prep work. And I remember in 2019, my dad passed away. And it was crazy because the exact same day he passed away, a film festival in Toronto, Blood in the Snow, was going on. And I know the person who runs Blood in the Snow, Kelly, and he was like, "Oh man, I'm really sorry." Like he felt so bad for my dad and everything. He's like, "I'm really sorry. You don't have to come. There's always next year." But I remember leaving that hospital because he had terminal cancer, and we did assisted dying, and so he passed away in my arms. And probably 2 hours later, I'm at a networking event. So I was like, "Okay, I have to." Like, I was so committed, and it's just like leaving the hospital, my mom's crying, everybody's crying, and I'm like, okay, I gotta go to the barber, gotta get a shave, gotta get a haircut. Got my one sheets together, got dressed up, took an Uber down to the festival, and I just walked in, and Kelly came up to me. He's like, "How are you here? How are you here?" And it was crazy at networking when because I'd be talking about my dad, and because he was a musician and he got me into music, and that's how I got into the composing side of things. And they would say, "Oh, how, where's your dad? What's he doing now?" I'm like, "Well, he actually passed away this morning, a couple hours ago." So, and I
yeah.
just because it was just that I was just set on it. I was like, I have to do this. I got to make a movie. And I I think a lot of it was people kind of felt bad about the situation, so they were encouraging me, like, "Oh, you can do this." But after speaking with distributors and other producers, they were and trying to pitch this. I'm not going to say the distributor's name, but I remember they said, "Okay, so let me get this straight: no blood, no nudity, no swearing, and no color. Do you know what else you're not going to have? A movie." Word for word, that's what they said. And I was like, and like the more I pitched, like the worse it got. And then one of my the producer I was working with, he was like, "Listen, I'm gonna go to Fantasia. I'll pitch some stuff there. It's more of an international distributors. Like this stuff is all local. Like we'll do this." And after he came back from Fantasia, he's like, "Let's go for dinner. I'll buy you dinner." I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "Well, I'll buy you dinner." And then he didn't even say anything. He just put his face in his hands. He's just like, "I'm sorry, man." I'm like, "What is it?" He's like, "Dude, they like they like they were like they didn't know what I was talking about pitching this. They had no idea what I was talking about." And even the people that did, they were just like, "I don't know how something like that can get made." Because he's like, it's not even just the trying to make it is going to be a task in itself,
Yeah.
but try taking that to a marketing person or a distributor right now. They're going to be like, "I have no idea what to do with this,"
Mhm.
right? Because it doesn't really fit into a lot
It's
of
something that
modern
doesn't
horror stuff,
exist right now. Yeah.
right? And it's unfortunate. So that was a big, and I was so adamant. I'm like, no, we can do it because it's different. Because it's different, that's why it'll work. And I remember there was a website, and it had top 10 scream queens of all time and everything like that. And it had Jamie Lee Curtis, it had Leanna Quigley, and no disrespect to them or anything like that, but I'm looking at the list. I'm like, wait a minute, where's Faye Ray? Where's Evelyn Ankers? Where's Barbara Steele? Like, I don't like it. It just I was so like flabbergasted, and I remember telling my friend, even my girlfriend, and I was just like, "What is this?" I was so mad, and finally they were just like, "Okay, we want like," and they sent me something, and it was, "We want you to listen to this," and it was a horror podcast talking about why Creepshow is the greatest horror anthology ever made, and there was a comment in there that said, "Well, no horror anthologies were really done before Creepshow," and I was like, what? And I just started naming them off, what the original Tales from the Crypt, all of Amicus Films and Tales of Terror and I remember them sitting down with me and just saying, "Look, these people don't know your little old monster movies. More importantly, they don't care about your little old monster movies. But the most important thing that you have to take away from that is the people that don't care and don't know, that's your audience."
100%.
So that was a big, oh, because I'm looking at the camera, I'm looking at all my stuff, and it's just like it got me in a little bit of a funk. But be, I kind of took a break from kind of pursuing that, and I just focused on music. Because right after that, the pandemic hit and everything, so everything slowed down anyway. So I was just kind of in the studio doing music. Got a couple soundtrack gigs. Scored my first feature last year, so I was happy about that, and I'm working with that director as well and doing her other feature. That's I'm just waiting for the final edit of that, so that way we can do picture lock and I can score it to picture. So I was, I'm still hoping one day I can make a movie, but I think the more that time goes by, it's just going to be so far removed from the lexicon of modern horror audiences that it it's going to be a kind of I'm going to be I kind of come to terms with I would have to operate it as a loss, even if I were to get the money to make it and show it around, because my idea was I was going to tour it like a road show and
Yeah.
tour it like drive-in to drive-in, repertory theater to repertory theater, just like they would do back in the 50s. And um, that was my goal. Especially, it's kind of funny because even during the pandemic, I'm like, okay, drive-ins are big now because of social distancing. We can do it. Now's the time to do it. And it's just like, dude, let it go, let it go.
Here's something. Here's something. Everett. All right. So if you would have pitched me this idea last year, I would have been like, Everett, you're out of your fucking mind.
Yeah,
This is not gonna fucking work, right?
no,
But now pitching this idea, and the only reason I'm saying this is because I've interviewed so many indie horror filmmakers, and I ask them what is their favorite horror movie, and in my mind, I'm expecting Exorcist, Halloween, Jason, Nightmare
yeah,
on Street. But so many of them say the original Dracula. They say Frankenstein. They say the old movies, and I don't expect. I'm talking about people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s
yeah,
are saying that. And listen, I enjoy those movies. Do I put those movies in my top 10? God no. I'm 41, you know. But but I do enjoy those movies.
yeah.
But I don't expect. But so many people enjoy those old monster movies, and I'm slowly realizing that in the last 7 months I've been doing this YouTube channel. I'm shocked. I'm like, wow, people do remember those movies. People do care about those movies. People
Yeah.
do love those movies. And yeah, so I mean, I I wouldn't shoot that idea down.
No, I think with those films though, it's one of the it's a weird thing because I know that Universal keeps trying to do the dark universe They keep trying to
Yes,
start it. Every
and
single
it's,
time it flops,
it
and
starts to die.
I know it just nosedives right away. And I also think that a lot of times when people do this type of style, a lot more often than not, it's a parody. And I didn't want to do a parody. I want to try and make it scary. I want to try it, and that's a really difficult task, even just for writing. I remember going through multiple writers, and they just didn't understand. Like, I think part of that is also on me because I expected them to understand, and I've had to realize that okay, not everyone is into this type of stuff, so I can't expect them to be 100% accurate. It's an unrealistic expectation because I collect scripts and everything from that era. Like I have Bride of the Monster, Bride of the Gorilla, Hideous Sun Demon. I have those shooting scripts and pre-production scripts and everything, and I would go through it, and I want them to write exactly that type of style. And I realized that a lot of that script writing back then had a lot of camera movement. It was a lot more descriptive than modern scripts and modern screenplays, and the format was completely different. And I remember showing that to these writers, and they were just like, and they were really confused with the dialogue. I remember one draft, one of the writers came back to me, and it was all in like Victorian English. I'm like, no, no, it's the 1950s. Like, it's not the 1850s or whatever. It's the 1950s because there was a certain dialect and a certain cadence throughout each decade, and there was certain slang, and it was sometimes it's that kind of thing is lost unless you're so involved in it. And I listen to like a lot of old radio programs, and some of the dialogue that you hear in those old radio programs, nobody would come up with that now, or very few people will come up with that now, I would say, just because it's just far removed from modern lexicon, and that's just not how people talk anymore.
I agree. I agree. I still think there's when it comes to the horror community, there's so many cultures, subgenres, I should say,
Yeah.
and there's a niche for anything. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like there's an audience. I 125%, and like I said, I would not say that a year ago. Right now, what are we in? November 2023, I can say there's an audience for
There is. It's definitely very niche for
that.
sure. And I think just a lot of that is also kind of exposure as well. And a lot of that is media. When, like earlier, we were talking about those podcasts or those top 10 lists and everything. If they don't
Mhm.
talk about these movies, then less people are going to know about them.
This.
I remember just even Friday the 13th is a perfect example. It's crazy how a lot of that franchise is so derivative of other movies. And I remember bringing that up to somebody, and they were like, "What are you talking about?" And I had to show them, like, "No, this scene from this movie. This is this character," and it was it's understandable, but it's also because they're not exposed to that type of stuff because nobody's teaching them. My favorite one of the things that kind of harps on me the most. I'm not even a huge Batman fan, but I remember there was a magazine at the supermarket, and it said Batman throughout the years in cinema and TV and everything, and they said Adam West was the first Batman, but that wasn't true. But it was printed in the magazine that he was the first Batman. I'm like, but it's not true. And I think because more if somebody reads that, they're going to take that as gospel, and then they're going to tell someone else, and that it basically that's how that happens. And the Batman from 1943 just gets ignored. It's on Tubi, but who's going to watch it? So
because because Batman, I mean, Adam West Batman is the first Batman that I ever known. I was born in 1982, so I remember watching, even though they were on before I was born, they would be on rerun, and I would
yeah,
watch the Batman and Robin, the pow, bing, dun. So
yeah,
like, to me, that was my first exposure to Batman.
Right.
So if somebody came up to me, I'm a big comic fan, but if somebody came up to me and I wasn't one, I was just a casual. Adam West would be the first Batman.
Exactly. And I think that's also the horror audience as well, the horror genre. A lot of them are just casual fans, and that's not a knock against them or anything like that. It's just because it's even the people that are fans of the Universal monster films, they're casual fans of those movies. Like I know Del Toro is going to be doing a remake of Frankenstein, and somebody was like, "Oh, you can't top the original," and I just I just thought like, okay, should I comment and say that the Karloff version wasn't the original? Like, because and that's something that my girlfriend, and she's kind of reeled me in, and she said, in a lot of these networking events, when you go to them, if somebody asks you what your favorite horror movie franchise is, or a horror film or whatever, sometimes it's better just to say Halloween. Sometimes it's better just
I
to
was
say
to say
Friday the
that.
13th. At least that way, get your foot in the door. Because
It's
sometimes
to
when you
say
come
that.
up with these obscure things, or it's not even that you're doing it maliciously, you're trying to start a conversation, or just talk about a topic of interest. But right away, if somebody comes up to you and says, "What's your favorite horror franchise?" and you come and I come up with something completely obscure, Spanish, whatever, immediately the conversation's over because that person can't relate. They're like, "Okay, that's interesting," and they give me their card, and then they go off, and I just end up sitting alone because it's not even that I'm trying to um, be smarter than them or anything like that. It's more of just, okay, there's nothing for them to bounce off of. There's no sounding board, and that so I'm trying to learn that as well when networking and navigating. So and when somebody says, what's your favorite horror composer, just say, okay, it's John Carpenter. Even though it's
Yep.
not, I
Just
like
keep
John
it
Carpenter, so
straight.
it's good enough. Good enough. It's a
But
safe bet.
that's why I never ever say I think I've only said in one interview, Henry, a portrait of a serial killer.
Mhm.
I think I said it in one interview and the person knew what I was talking about. But to the average horror fan, they don't know what the fuck that is.
No.
So I don't talk about it. So I say I go straight to Halloween 1978 because everybody knows what that is.
Yeah.
That's what you go with.
Yeah.
But even you, we bringing up the Friday the 13th. So majority of horror fans, I feel, are casual. I feel like
Yeah.
there's hardcore, which is only a small percentage, and everyone else I'm talking about who are buying movie tickets, going to horror conventions, they're casual.
Yeah.
Probably probably 70% to 30% hardcore. So you go to a casual fan and you tell them who's who played Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th Part Two. They're going to say Kane Hodder every single time because Kane Hodder is the Jason that's in their head.
Right.
And the average person, you ask them who their favorite Jason is, they're going to go straight to Kane Hodder. Not bad mouthing Kane Hodder, but
No.
Kane Hodder was in the worst Friday the 13th. He was in consecutively in the worst Friday the 13th movies. He
Mhm.
was not the best Jason at all. But
No.
that's everybody's go-to answer is Kane Hodder because he's the most recognizable, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say so. I think so much of it comes down to marketing as well. Uh, with Jason and Freddy and even Michael Myers and now Leatherface, once you start to like have these t-shirts and like Hot Topic and stuff like that, you kind of take out that because you have to. I think a lot of people don't realize these franchises are made by studios. They're not independent, right?
True.
They're not like lower tier independent studios from the 80s, where a lot of really good films and a lot of really good slasher movies came from. They're made by Paramount. They're made by New Line and everything.
Dimension.
It's a marketing force. They have the machine behind them. So whatever they're going to pipe in, they're going to pipe in. Which is it's interesting because Freddy Krueger. I'm so shocked that even to this day, people play down his pedophilic tendencies, like the
I
character's
played.
pedophilic tendencies.
I
No, but
love
it's
Freddy
just like
Krueger. I played that.
it's weird like that
Yeah,
he's on like lunch boxes and t-shirts and everything. I'm like,
I had a toy growing up and everything.
yeah, and it's just like I I don't, but it's one of those things where it's marketing, right? If they don't talk about that aspect of the character, or they don't really investigate that aspect of the character, then it, no harm, no foul. I just always thought that was weird with that character. I was just thought it was so strange because even like when I found out when I about the franchise and I was watching it, and it was so comical and everything, especially in the later sequels, I was like, you essentially have like an undead Albert Fish. And he's on kids' lunchboxes. I'm like, doesn't and he's on The Simpsons and this. I'm like, it's so there's something off, or but it comes down to marketing, and so I think a lot of that is kind of lost, and so that's what a lot of modern horror fans and casual horror fans, like you would say. I would actually say that there would be three categories. There's the casual horror fans, the hardcore, and then like hardcore
Yeah, the
horror fans.
hardcore that has
Yeah,
the Italian and the German horror movies. They're spilling and telling you about. Those are the hardcore. They're like, whoa, you never seen blah 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 blah. Those are the hardcore. I'm like right in the middle between. I'm somewhere between because I always thought that I was a hardcore horror fan. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm a hard horror. I'm not because I would go to horror conventions and stand on lines, and I would hear guys reciting line verbatim from Evil Dead 2. Like, well, remember in scene 4 or 5, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm not that hardcore horror fan. I'm not. I love horror.
yeah.
I have a lot of horror knowledge, but I'm not that hardcore where like my life revolves around horror. I'm not.
No,
Yeah.
no, but it's funny because even the person reciting Evil Dead 2 probably can't recite, something from the 50s or
No,
or the
exactly.
30s or whatever. They probably can't recite, Edward Van Sloan's monologue in James Whale's Frankenstein. So it's all relative,
It
right?
is.
It's funny because a lot of people, the film Beyond the Darkness, which was Joe D'Amato's film. I think it's also called Buio Omega. It's an Italian film, and a lot of people don't realize that's a remake of an earlier '60s film with Franco Nero. But
I didn't even.
it is what it is. If people don't realize it, if it's not spoken about, then it is. It doesn't make a person a less horror fan. Like I was watching one of your interviews. I forgot the gentleman's name, but you asked him if he had Drive-In Massacre, right?
Oh yes,
The because his Blu-ray collection or whatever.
yes. Mhm.
And so I got Drive-In Massacre, but that doesn't make me a bigger horror fan than him. It just
No,
we have different tastes. Like I personally, I don't like Evil Dead. I don't like. I'm not a huge Romero guy, and I'm not a huge Argento guy. So I don't collect their stuff just to have it, right? Because that was kind of a turning point in my physical media collection when that 4K Ultra 6 disc Dawn of the Dead thing came out. I was like, oh, I really want to get it, but then I'm like, but I don't like the movie. So, so it was more of like, okay, no, I got to cut back. So
you know something weird. I realized something. I don't know if you realized too, but I feel like the older I get, my taste in horror movies change. Like I used to be a big Romero guy, and I can't believe I'm about to say this on live on YouTube. I'm looking back at his movies. The original Night of the Living Dead, I enjoy, but looking back at his movies, I'm like, why did I like his movies? Like, I mean, I find I used to love the original Dawn of the Dead, but now looking back at, I like the reboot better than I did original.
yeah, it's interesting because his grave is actually in Toronto here, and visited it probably maybe 2 years ago, and it was kind of interesting. They were doing a retrospective at the TIFF Bell Lightbox of Romero, and he was there introducing his films and everything. And I didn't really watch many of his movies. I watched Dead Living Dead because I'm like, okay, classic.
Mhm.
But I remember meeting him, and he was like, "Oh, so what film are you interested in seeing?" And I said, "Honestly, the film you're not showing." And that wasn't a knock on him. He goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I really like There's Always Vanilla." The kind of coming of age story that he did back in it was actually just between Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. He did like The Crazies, There's Always Vanilla, and Season of the Witch. And Season of the Witch is fantastic.
Yes.
It's my girlfriend loves it, and I love There's Always Vanilla. And I told him there seems to be this motif in his movies that he I don't know if, I don't know the man's personal life or anything, but there's always this young boy that falls in love with like an older woman, or like especially in Martin he has like a love relationship with like an older neighbor,
Mhm.
and that's kind of what There's Always Vanilla is about, where it's this kid who is trying to live a wild lifestyle, and his father basically tells him like, sometimes you're in life is like an ice cream parlor, and you're getting all these different flavors, and you want to get the most craziest concoction in the world, but sometimes there's always vanilla. Sometimes the simple things in life are the best, and it was
Yes.
such like a poignant film, and I remember telling him this, and he was looking at me like, what, like, he's like, and
Screwball.
he was actually kind of like taken aback. He's like, "Oh, okay." But because whenever they do these retrospectives, they always had or at tip. I don't know if they do them anymore, but they always would have the director pick a film that they would want to screen as well. So he screened Michael Powell's Peeping Tom, so I got to see that, and he was actually in the audience and everything, Romero. So
Awesome.
and he was watching it because it was all on 35. I didn't want to go see any of his digital projections or anything. Being a film guy and everything, I was like, no, I got to see it on 35. So that was a thing. That was kind of an experience of watching that with him. Like he wasn't anywhere near me, but it was still kind of like wow, because you could see it like he was really interested in just every single shot of that movie. So it's interesting seeing where he came from and his influences.
Amazing. So, Everett, you know you're a fan of my show, so you know what time it is. I'm gonna
Yeah.
ask you three, but I'm gonna give you two. This is gonna be the first time. I'm gonna ask you three questions about my show, and then I'm gonna ask you three hard questions. You
Okay.
ready? All
Yeah.
right. First, one, start with my show. What is your favorite interview that I've done?
I would actually say the interview that you did with, I believe his name is Mark Allen, who did Just Before Dawn, the
Yeah,
novelization. I thought that was probably been my favorite interview, just because
great.
it it wasn't just about horror. It was about literature. It was about literacy in America and the literacy rates in education and the school system. It was definitely up there for me. I actually watched that interview probably two or three times.
Good news. He's coming back on soon. So,
No, nice.
two. Yep.
I added him on Facebook and everything. Like I add actually most of your guests. Same with like uh, Libby McDermott and what else did I add? Um, the horror therapist as well.
That show's great,
I added
isn't it?
her, and yeah, and Jason. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, but the one who did Final Summer, I added him as well.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Edinburgh.
yeah, I added him. So
Nice guy.
yeah, great guy. I like that interview as well. It's interesting because even as like a composer, I was like, oh, I met him or kind of knew about him before. I would have like been like, yo, I want to score your movie. So I
But
too would have.
I'm pretty sure he's okay for me talking about it.
Yeah.
It was like a day before our interview, and his movie was released, and he sent me like a message, a DM message, like it was like 11 o'clock at night, and he was just telling me like the first couple of reviews came out, and he was like, really, this is his first movie. He was like really bummed, and like him and I talked for like 20 or 30 minutes, just messaged back and forth. I was like, dude, I enjoy your movie. Like, don't worry about like, not everybody's gonna enjoy your movie. You know what
No.
I'm saying? It's not everybody enjoys mine. My YouTube channel doesn't have 100% approval rating. I think it's
No.
97%, which is not bad, but it's not 100%. Not everybody likes me. Everybody thinks some people I think I'm a douchebag. So I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. You can't you
But
can't you can't worry about that stuff. It's interesting because it's such kind of a conflicting mentality with directors. Like if you get a director like Jodorowsky who talks about his films or like clouds and all this very artistic. He's got like maybe 4 or 5 films or 6 films to his name after all these years. Whereas you compare someone like Michael Winner, who is people are like, but the reviews are terrible. Everybody's bashing it. He's just like, I'm laughing my way to the bank. I don't care. So, and he's like, listen, I did Death Wish 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't care.
keep it
And it just, and he,
going.
but that was just his mentality where he treated it as a business. And
Mm,
I don't know how many films he had. I think 60 or something like that, or 70, probably more. Um, but I think sometimes people get too wrapped up in reviews, and a lot of times you have to look at it from the review is based on that person's personal exposure as well. I remember somebody bashing the movie The Howling. They're like, I don't understand it. Why is this scene here? Why is this scene? But if you weren't a fan of those old monster movies that it's referencing,
exactly.
you're not going to understand why there's that elongated scene with Roger Corman, or why the doctor's name is Dr. Wagner because George Wagner directed The Wolfman. All it's so
But
if you don't know that, then you're going to be watching it and be like, I don't get it. So
exactly.
it's all relative.
If you were born like in the 2000s, you're probably a Terrifier fan, but you're probably not a fan of Halloween, the original Halloween, because I mean it's two different movies. So, I mean, I think also has to deal with what generation you're in.
Yeah.
Like I grew up in the '80s slasher movies, so his movie was just an '80s slasher. I liked it,
Hmm.
and but yeah, I mean, listen, I learned when I first started doing this. Like, I read every comment, and I actually respond to every comment.
Yeah.
Now the constructive criticism, yeah, I was like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Let me give that a try. I'm gonna start putting music in the front of my video, and I did, and it was a good idea. Uh, I'm not afraid of getting constructive criticism. Now, people were saying, "Oh, you're an asshole," something like that. I just say thank you for watching because at the end of the day, I'm not going to get into a verbal argument. It doesn't. You got to have thick skin. We do this type
Right.
of stuff because we're in the era of online tough guys who are their lives are shitty or something's going on, and the easiest thing you can do is just comment on someone's movie or YouTube channel or whatever and try to put that on them. So this
Yeah,
is
I mean, you
that you
can't
have.
worry about it. Like, and I
Yeah,
think the comments that kind of bother me are not so much about like if it's just kind of an ignorant comment or something like that,
yeah,
then there's no merit to it. There's no
yes, those are the ones I'm
um
talking.
exactly. Or if somebody says, but I think the comments that bother me uh are the ones like, for example, I'm not a fan of Terrifier, but if somebody was like, "Oh, it's because you're soft" or whatnot, I'm like, it's such a immature response. Like it's such a immature rebuttal because it's just like, okay, but you probably haven't seen a lot of the stuff that I've seen. Like so, like it's a strange thing. Those type of those type of movies because I just think you're not really. It's it. To be honest, the reason why I don't like Terrifier is I actually thought it was very pedestrian. I thought it was very safe. I didn't think it was. I think that a lot of the time is what exploitation marketing does. It's overpromise, underdeliver. Um, and I remember going into it and being like, oh, like after I watched it, I was just like, okay. It just I think because my exposure to films like Men Behind the Sun, Cannibal Holocaust, like really extreme stuff, it's just more like I've already seen the plateau and I see somebody aiming here. So I'm not really that moved by it. But if people haven't been exposed to this, then that's going to be their plateau.
Yes, exactly.
So I can't be bothered with stuff like that. It's just because to me it just comes off as like a pissing competition at that point.
With me, I just find listen, I like the second one. I mean, but in general, the series is mean spirited. You know, I don't
Yeah.
like mean spirited movies. I don't care if it's horror. It's just mean. It's just there's no message behind it. You know what I mean? There's no
Mm.
story behind it. It's just mean spirited. And you know, I was even talking to the the filmmaker we were talking about with the drive-in. Him and I were having a whole conversation. We were like, it's it's kind of woman hating. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It definitely it has this vibe to it, but it's a weird thing because I've interviewed several women filmmakers and I asked them who was their favorite horror character, and they all say Art the Clown. I'm like, that's interesting.
Mhm.
You know?
It's not when you really I don't really wanna get into it too much, but it's not really where, um, when you watch films from the '80s and you're exposed to, like, stuff like Guinea Pig or Faces of Death, all that stuff, it's, it's actually pretty safe, that movie, and I know there's that infamous scene with the hacksaw and everything, but I think because I watched it the same week I watched this, Spanish, I think it was a Spanish, giallo film from 1985, and there was a scene that was similar to that, and it was pretty brutal, but it was such a good movie called, The Killer Is Still Among Us. It's on Tubi, uh, and I remember seeing that and then seeing Terrifier, and I was like, "What's the difference?" I'm like,
It's a
"She still has her
story.
underwear on." That's the
But
difference.
I'm just saying when it comes to Terrifier, it's not the gore for me, it's the story. There's
No, oh
no
no, for sure. It's essentially just a pornographic film,
it just
but or a
runs right
modern
through.
pornographic film, I would say.
Yeah. It
Because
runs right
even
through.
even pornography in the '70s had a plot to it. I mean, as thin as it
Mhm.
was, but because actually got it legalized, where you actually had to have some type of story to it. You actually had to have a crew, and they were shooting on film back then, so they were like, okay, we have to actually make a movie. But now it feels like it's just um, very mechanical. There's no real framing. It's just all the sole purpose of the piece is just to get to the money shot or the whatever it is. And I don't know. It's I think I wouldn't mind it if it was like 10 minutes or 20
It
minutes.
was
Like
overkill.
yeah, like the original Guinea Pig film. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's the most famous one that Charlie Sheen called the FBI because he thought it was a real snuff film.
Yes.
But that's only I don't even I think it's like only like half an hour or something like that. I gotta double check, but I remember watching that, and even that's just kind of like meh. There's no plot to it or anything like that. But for like a 20-minute thing or a 30-minute thing, I'm like, "Oh, okay, it is what it is, and then you just kind of move on. It's more of it came off really more like an elongated music video.
Yeah. 2 hour.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's okay. I mean, a lot of people really like that style.
I like that.
Yeah, a lot of
I didn't
people
like the
really
second
like
one.
that fast editing.
Yep.
Because even the music, it was just constant. Like it was just okay.
Mhm.
Well, and there was and so you're getting stimulated on all fronts. So it's a rush watching something like that. But I mean, it's sort of like with music. It's almost like a guitar solo.
Yeah.
You're shredding and going all over the place, but you can't remember anything. So like
Yeah.
when you listen back, you're just like, there's no melody to it.
All right. You ready for the second question? Okay. The
Sure.
second question, I'm going to shoot it to. What is the most unique interview you've seen me do? You're like, huh, that's interesting.
The most unique, probably the one you did with the director of, I'm not sure the film's full name, but it was Smokey, where he had some type of looked like a looked like a
Oh, a Vinny
yeah,
Vineyard.
Yeah.
The video here, he had a disco ball on his head.
Yeah, a disco ball.
Yes.
I was just like, well, that's because I actually always appreciate when an artist develops a character. Like I'm a huge fan of Coffin Joe, and the fact that he developed a character, like a persona, as a director that people would gravitate to, and they would know that his style and his character, and he would go out in public like that. I guess it's the same way as like luchadors and everything, where they have to wear their masks in public. It's just part of
Yeah.
their persona.
So,
So I like I appreciate stuff like that. I thought that was very unique because most people just kind of go, just come on with a hoodie and
it's just
a hoodie
roll,
in
right?
their bedroom, and it, it's cool, but it's just eh.
Vinny was
But
definitely
I
a
like
fun
when
interview.
someone puts an effort into that.
Vinny was definitely a fun interview.
Oh yeah, it was
Now,
really
what was the first video or interview that got you? You're like, I'm gonna subscribe to this guy's channel.
it was actually I actually think it was the interview with Libby McDermott.
Really?
I was just like, oh, because I saw you posting a couple independent horror groups and everything, and I was just like, well, let me click on this. So I clicked on it and I watched the entire thing because my blind spot is I don't watch a lot of modern films. I just don't. Like for the first time this year, I watched The Conjuring. It's just I know I just it's not a personal it's just not a personal preference to me. It took forever for my girlfriend to get me to watch Color Out of Space, and I liked it. I liked it. It not, and she's still asking me to watch Mandy, and I
Mandy's
I still
amazing. By
haven't.
the way, Mandy is absolutely fucking amazing.
Yeah,
You have
I
to
heard
watch
it's
Mandy.
really
You
good.
have to watch Mandy. I mean, it's
Yeah,
beautiful. It's Mandy is a shit.
she said it's art house meets grindhouse. So I'm like,
100%. It is
okay,
masterpiece. Masterpiece. Nicholas Cage
perfect.
is amazing in it. Nicholas Cage is amazing in everything. Wow, that's a
Yeah,
different story.
yeah. It's interesting because like I said, I don't watch a lot of modern stuff. So when it's talking about like horror franchises and everything, I'm like, I'm completely out of the loop. I have no idea. I have like when somebody was talking about Saw, I'm like, okay, like I didn't even know we were up to 10. Like I just stopped paying attention. And it's not a knock against it saying it's bad. I think it's just because I'm so familiar with like older filmmaking and filmmaking styles. I find them more relaxing to watch, just the way things are shot and the way things are edited. Whereas now it's very handheld, quick cuts, everything, and I just find it I find it so draining to watch something like that. I don't know why. Just sitting down, I'm just like, oh my god, especially in the theater, watching something like that in the theater. I was just like, I remember seeing Cloverfield in the theater. I was just like, oh man, like I was getting nauseous watching it.
I remember a movie that you commented, I mean, interview you say you commented and you loved. It was with Donald Farmer.
Yep,
He made, what was it called? It was something Barbie. No, Darby.
Darby's Death House or
Hill House
something.
or
Yep.
something like Murder House or something like that.
Yeah,
Yes.
and yeah, I was I'm still a fan of Donald Farmer. I actually did a cover of one of his scores, or not like his score, but a score for one of his movies and everything. And I did that on my YouTube channel, and I was just I don't know, like because he grew up in a time where it was hard to make a movie still.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's easy to make a movie now, but it's definitely a lot easier now, especially just getting it out. Like you can just put it on YouTube if
Yep.
all else fails. You can just
Boom.
film it on your phone, put it on YouTube. That's why found footage is so big. And whereas now it's like, it's so easy where, trying to convince producers or distributors now to even shoot with that camera that I wanted because with that camera you can't see through it while you film.
Mhm.
It's a rack over system. So the viewfinder's here, the lens is here, and you have to rack the body over to do all your focusing and framing and then rack it back over so the film gate goes back on the lens. And that was the standard until 1970 something. So all that cinematography you saw from the 30s, 40s, 50s, they couldn't see while they were filming. It was just all estimated, and that's how good those
Overflow.
cinematographers were. Whereas now it's just all video taps, and you can just play it back on the computer and everything. It's I remember even just shooting on film with short movies and everything, and honestly, it was it was irresponsible of me to put the crew through that because it requires a lot of prep work. And when they found out that how expensive it was, like especially the actors, once they found out how expensive the format was, suddenly the pressure went through the roof, right? And they started flubbing their lines. They started just panicking because they heard that film going through the camera. I'm like, yeah, that's the sound of my money burning. So it's like, so for every 10 minutes, I'm spending probably $600 or $700. Um, with the raw stock, the processing, the scanning, everything. So it was, and I tried to keep it as secret as possible. But then they looked it up and saw how expensive it was, and but I had a great crew and everything. But even they were like, it was a lot of pressure just to make sure everything was working
Imagine.
because they're used to like, okay, now we can go check the footage. Just put it
Yeah.
on the computer. I'm like, oh no, we gotta wait like a week or so to check the footage. It's and sometimes you get the footage back. It's like, okay, that's out of focus, but we got to use it. And I think that's kind of why I like that style. It's such a raw format. It feels like going into a studio and recording onto tape or direct to wax like they did back in like the 20s, where it's just like, okay, hit that record button and go. And
Oh,
whatever, if your guitar's out of tune, whatever, that's what it is. And sometimes that gives it the character that you are looking for, that type of style. And I think I kind of, and I'm really hoping, like I said, I'm still hoping that I can shoot something on film and do everything, but it's more and more it's looking less likely, sadly. Not just from an economical point of view, but just from an experience point of view. Uh, Trying to get an editor for something like that, trying to get a cinematographer. It took a long time to get a cinematographer, and of course, I had people saying, "Oh, let me touch like let me." I'm like, "But you don't know what you're doing." And it's my money. So, but it's
whatever.
but
I'm gonna do.
it's irresponsible because I know there's a lot. Filmmaking is a hard thing to get into, and it's
Yes.
hard for everybody's trying to get on set. Everybody's trying to make a movie. Actors are trying to make a name for themselves and everything, and it puts too much pressure on them for me to be like, okay, so you need to rehearse because a lot of those actors back in the day were stage trained actors, so they were used to doing it in play style. Um, Whereas now, a lot of times, as opposed to rehearsing their lines or rehearsing anything, people are kind of on their phones, uh, basically Instagramming or documenting what they're doing and putting
Yeah.
it on their channels and everything. Which is, I have nothing against that, but it's just like, okay, like this is a critical thing. Like
Yeah.
we're in the we're in the final stages here, and I need you to focus because like we only got so much film. Because once we run out of film, I'm like, it's not like we got to wait. I got to order it from Kodak or Oro or something, right? And then it takes a while to get, and that's it. But so it was it's a little bit irresponsible for that. But I'm still adamant that I really want to do it, but it's hard.
Well, Everett, you've heard me. I'm about to put you on the spot. You've probably heard me say this 100 times already. Everett, tell us or my audience about your movie.
Well, I actually had three different movies that I was pitching because my producer always said that you should have three different ideas that you can put to distributors. So I'll tell you one. It was called The House That Couldn't Die. And essentially, it was the story, it's very similar to Hitchcock's Rebecca, in which a girl inherits a house from her grandmother, and her husband, and she's recovering from a mental breakdown. Her husband is there, and he's like, look, we need the money, we got to restore it and sell it. Very typical, haunted house story. You've probably heard that in a bunch of movies. And she's there with her sister, and then she starts experiencing strange things in the house. And you don't know if the house is actually haunted or if it's her husband and the sister that are manipulating her and orchestrating this to drive her back to the insane asylum so that way they can get the full share once they sell the property because the property is about to be developed. So lo and behold, it's the house is haunted and they have to deal with it. I kind of was inspired by Creature from the Haunted Sea, where they kind of wanted to mock a sea monster and use it to kind of scare away swimmers and boats from sunken treasure. But there is actually a sea monster down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of used it for that. So and that was the one I was really gunning for. I was like, hey, we got to do that one. And
That's a great story.
yeah, it sounds simple, but then once once you actually go into it, you're like, oh, like we got to construct these sets, and it's like, yeah, like it's a lot of work. Because I was so adamant, like, okay, we can't shoot it on location, not with that camera. It's impossible. That's why a lot of those films back in the day were shot on sets. That way they could move walls around, move
Yeah.
things around, and I'm like, hey, we have to shoot it like that. Just logistically, we have to do it to accommodate the camera. And because I could have easily just took a phone, rented a house in wherever, and shot it over the course of a weekend with a couple actors, or even a couple weeks with a couple actors and a small crew, but it wouldn't have been the same movie, and I didn't want to do that. And so that was my that was my that was my idea for the movie. But it was more about the promotion of it. I really wanted to do that William Castle style promotion, drive around with a hearse, everything, advertising the movie, having uh, stuff in the theater, like you can take a picture in the coffin and all that stuff. Very ballyhoo stuff back in like from the 50s. That's how they would sell it. And I was going to use half of a portion of the budget for the actual movie, and then most of the other budget was actually going to be for touring purposes. And telling that to distributors and producers, they were like, "What's a road show? Like, what are you talking about?" And they're like, "So you want to do a concert? No, no." And then you have to explain to them what a road show is and what the prints and advertising are and everything. So it was. I still want to do it. I still want to do it, but like I said, it's less and less likely that it looks to happen just because people aren't going to be familiar with either that style or they're not going to be familiar with the means to do it, especially now with
I don't.
things like
I think.
AI or
I think.
CGI.
I think that is so niche, man. I mean, nostalgia. People love shit. Like I said, Dracula is, I would say, the number one favorite horror movie out of. You've seen my interviews. I asked them. Everybody says Dracula, and I'm like, that's interesting. In 2023,
It's a
people
timeless
still,
story. It's a timeless
yeah,
story.
they love the old original Dracula.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good one. I actually, yeah, I like that. I mean, Lugosi's definitely up there for me, and as one of my faves. But no, I just for me, the original Dracula, I always felt like because I saw Abbott Costello meet Frankenstein first, I always thought the older Dracula was a little bit slow because it didn't have any music, and I
It's
thought it was like, like yeah, as a kid, like I couldn't get into it. As I got older, I could get into it, but as a kid, I was just more interested in the 40s as opposed to the 30s aspect, and then the 50s. I think probably just because it had music behind it and it was
Mhm.
more going on. Um, but no, that one is definitely a classic, and it's interesting because it almost didn't get made because Carl Laemmle Sr. was so against doing horror movies, but his son was like he really wanted to do them and he really wanted to do Dracula, and after the runaway success, it like the dad was like, well, okay, and it saved the studio pretty much.
So Everett, where can everyone find you, my friend?
You can find me on Facebook, and you can find me on YouTube. My channel is Everett Dudgeon 138. So you'll find all my music there and ramblings and everything, and showing off some of the collection, uh, and talking about some releases and just my thoughts on things like remakes and whatnot. But like I said, I'm really trying to network and really trying to get back into filmmaking as opposed to just doing music. I mean, music is great. I love it, but it's not as social as doing a movie. And sometimes you need to get out of the house.
Well, as you know, I have a lot of indie filmmakers who watch my channel, support my channel. I love those guys.
Yeah.
So definitely, if you're gonna find your way networking, I mean, networking in the indie horror is amazing.
Yeah. That's why I add a lot of people from your channel, and it's not even if I don't really have anything uh, in common, at least it's there, right? At least I
Yeah.
can at least it's an all like I always extend the olive branch, and I always try and check out what people are doing. Like I said, when I watched that interview with Libby McDermott, I was like, okay, let me see what Dead Woman's Hollow is about, and I watched it, and okay, we'll just go from there, because that is, like I said, that's my blind spot. I have to start paying attention to what a lot of modern independent filmmakers are doing. Otherwise, I can't just keep, I can't be the old man shaking his fist at the
Yeah.
cloud and, saying, why don't you know this? Why don't you know that? Don't you know who this is? And because
There are some good stuff. There's some good stuff out there with the modern filmmaking. I mean, there is some good stuff out there.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, and it's interesting though that a lot of the older movies and everything are on Tubi, and it's so interesting seeing that you can actually watch like a modern horror movie, but then you can also watch like one of the classics and everything. So I hope more people watch the classics as well, and more people kind of get into that, because they're right there. They're easily accessible. They're not. They're not. You don't
That's
have to. You have to search for them.
that's what I love about Tubi. I
Yeah.
love Tubi because it is. If you're a horror fan, it is like the most. It is the ultimate app, and it's fucking free too.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate app. You got the old ones, you got the 80s, you got 90s. I don't care what generation of horror you want to go in. I don't care if you want to go big budget or indie. It's all there.
Yeah, I think for also it's good for doing test drives. Like I collect obviously a lot of physical media, and it's good for doing. I haven't heard of this movie. It's on Tubi. Let me check it out before I buy it. And if I don't
Correct.
like it, then I'm like, I'm not gonna buy it. But if I really like it, then I'll go and buy it.
Correct. All right, Everett. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. You're welcome anytime. And soon I'm have you back on my channel so we can talk about the pre-production of your movie.
Oh well, maybe I'll be old and gray by then. Who knows?
No.
But who knows? Who knows? Films will be shot on location on Mars by that point. But so 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 who knows? And but yeah, I mean, I like I said, I really hope I can do it, and I love being on your channel, and I love watching your interviews. So definitely, even if I don't have anything in pre-production or anything like that, I would love to. It's an honor to be here, and I would love to come back on and chat with you about whatever.
It's been a pleasure, man. I'm gonna be talking to Mark in a couple of days. I'm gonna tell him you're a fan of our interview as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Thank you so much.
No problem. All right. If you want, you know how to close out each one of my interviews, right? My videos. You
Thank
can
you
say
for
it
watching.
with,
Go ahead.
you can say it with me if you want.
Sure.
Thank you for coming to the horror room. I'm Travis Bruce. I'll see you guys next time.
See you next time. Thank you for calling. Thank you for coming to the horror realm.